Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, the podcast where we delve into the mysterious world of cold cases, missing persons, true crime, and the fascinating science that is forensics. I'm forensic scientist and criminologist Asha Walther, and I am so thrilled to have you with me on this journey as we dance in the shadows of the world of crime, shining a light on scientific discovery while becoming another voice for those who need it most. So grab a drink and get comfortable while we jump into this next episode together. As always, I would like to extend a content and trigger warning. This podcast is recommended for persons over the age of 18 and contains explicit content not suitable for minors. We will be covering sensitive content that ranges from sexual assault, physical, mental, social, and emotional abuse, suicide, homicide, murder, attempted murder, and other violent crimes, including crimes involving weapons and drugs. This often extends to drug misuse and other harmful and illegal activity. If you find any content to be distressing, I have listed a number of resources that may be able to help you in the podcast notes. I would also like to remind our listeners that all victims and all perpetrators are someone's loved one, so I ask that any discussions in our group or on our social media accounts remain respectful of that at all times, and by listening, you acknowledge that all persons of interest remain innocent until proven otherwise. Welcome to housekeeping, you guys. I am so excited to say that Apple has accepted the podcast, explicit content and all, so that is amazing. I am a Apple user, so that was very exciting for me. So welcome if you're listening on Apple. Please let me know how that is going for you and if everything is working well. It is Valentine's Day Eve, which is very sweet for some, sad for others, and let's be honest, most of us just don't care, but I do because it is my mum's birthday, so that's always a really good time of the year in this house. I am basically very busy right now. I have had a lot of requests for cases. I am trying to prioritize the ones that have a bit more information for me to work with before I present them to you. I have a lot of bonus content for those who are subscribing. I'm currently in the middle of a bioarchaeology short course right now. It's a professional short course, which essentially is like forensic anthropology. So we're thinking like the TV show Bones, but a little bit further down the track. So the fine line between human remains and archaeology. It's really interesting and it really complements my line of work, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I am also really happy to report I am not in the middle of a heat wave as I am recording this. It has been such a nice few days in the mid to high 20s here in Perth. I'm saying that and it's going to be over 30 again tomorrow, but I'm happy with that. It's not the 40s and I am not hot and dying in this room as I recorded this episode. So that is amazing. I also wanted to be sure to extend a huge thank you to those who subscribed to our Exhuming the Truth Plus content. That is the paid subscription. That is the subscriptions that get the bonus episodes, and I released the first bonus episode of the mini-series on the disappearance of Hayley Dodd. I released that last week, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have not listened to it, please subscribe and listen to it and let me know what you think. We've got a lot more episodes on Hayley coming. They're very detailed and I would like to do it well and I would like you to enjoy it, so please let me know what you think. So that is our first paid bonus episode for the Plus subscribers that's out. We have also our first special guest coming very soon. The only barrier I'm having is finding the right quality platform to record our interview because our guest is international, so it will be a remote interview. I'm really excited to share it with you. This person has been so incredibly kind and patient with me in this process. I asked them ages ago about this and they're still on board, which is amazing. But like I said, I think I'm settled on a platform, which is great for everybody involved. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that it's like 29 days, I think, until I go to Bali, which is amazing. But I will still be uploading episodes weekly and also will have bonus content. But while I'm over there, I'm actually going to be working on a special episode on the Bali bombings. So that will be coming too, as well as our weekly cases and bonus content. So I'm very busy right now, but I'm very appreciative. So thank you so much. So I think that's about all for housekeeping. I don't want to bore you too much. And I think we should just get straight into this case because it is a big one. Welcome to the case introduction for episode 3, titled Their Names Are Elizabeth Stevens, Deborah Fream and Natalie Russell. This is a tragic story of lives lost far too young, a humble community in terror, and the chilling banality of the evil amongst us. Let me take you back to 1993, in the quiet, seemingly safe suburb of Frankston, Victoria. A nightmare unfolded. 3 beautiful, innocent young women, Elizabeth Stevens, Deborah Fream, and Natalie Russell, were brutally murdered within weeks of each other. The sense of security shattered, replaced by fear and paranoia. Parents kept their children close, and the streets, once filled with laughter, grew silent. Criminal profile. Paul Charles Denyer, born on the 14th of the 8th, 72, in Campbelltown, Sydney, to mother Maureen Denyer and father Anthony Denyer. Maureen and Anthony met and married in London, UK in the 1960s. They migrated to Australia in 1965, where they had 6 children. Paul Denyer was the 3rd born child. They moved to Victoria as a family in 1981 when Anthony Denyer got a new job opportunity in the area. During his schooling years, Paul didn't fit in. He struggled with his identity and found himself to be self-conscious, particularly in his preteen years when he gained a little bit of weight. At the very young age of 10, Paul slashed the throat of his sister's Care Bear toy, which seemed relatively harmless until not long after, the family cat was found hanging from a tree with its throat also cut by Paul. Come age 12, Paul received amateur charges for stealing a vehicle, which led to an arrest on the grounds of assault of a fellow young student at the age of 15. Paul was also accused of forcing the same student to publicly masturbate. It wasn't long after these events that Paul Denyer's parents went through a divorce. Once he had left school, he was fired from 7 different places of employment when he attempted to join the Victorian Police but failed a physical exam. Come February of 1993, Paul Denyer gained employment at a boat building company in the coastal town of Seaford called Pro Marine. His co-workers noticed he had handmade several knives during his time at work. Paul then lost his job due to not completing tasks required of him. He was aged 21 at the age of the crimes committed. Victimology. I'm really sad and disheartened to share that it was very, very difficult to find victimology information on our victims. So I've kept it short and sweet with the names of the innocent victims and their ages and their approximate location prior to their deaths. Elizabeth Stevens was 18 years old. She left Tasmania to pursue a career in the army while staying with relatives and settled into Langwarrin. She was living with her auntie and uncle while she was finishing her studies. Deborah Fream was 22 years old. She lived near Cananook Station in Seaford. At the time of her death, her son was only 12 days old. Natalie Russell was 17 years old. She was a student at John Paul College. Crime line. It's 1993. In February, Paul Denyer breaks into Donna Vane's apartment. He kills her cats, vandalizes the place, and leaves a threatening message written in the blood of the cats, along with explicit images on the cats' bodies. It was around 7 p.m. on the evening of the 11th of June, 1993. Elizabeth had been living with her relatives for approximately 6 months at the time. She was on a bus that entered Cranbourne Road. As the bus turned into Patterson Avenue, she hopped off at the stop and began walking down the avenue. It was then that she was grabbed from behind and was believed to be threatened by a man with a gun. She screams for help, but the wind and the rain smothered her calls for help. The man ordered her to remain quiet and continued walking her down Patterson Avenue, holding her hand so passers-by would think that they were known to each other. And they did. Together, they reached Lloyd Park Reserve, where he made sexual advances to Elizabeth Stevens, followed by announcing he was not of any threat sexually. It was then that he continued to strangle, stab, and cut the throat of Elizabeth. He stomped on her face, breaking numerous bones, and dragged her lifeless, innocent body before stabbing and slashing her body more. On that fateful morning, Elizabeth had left a note to her aunt and uncle to let them know that she would be studying that day at either the City Library or TAFE and would likely arrive home around 8 p.m. Thinking she was just running late, her relatives were waiting until it reached 10:30 p.m. before they started driving around the neighbourhood, checking for any signs of Elizabeth. Without any luck, they alerted authorities who were concerned given she was a young female and it was late and very unlike her. Her body was recovered around 5 p.m. the following day by a man who was out collecting branches. She was just 250 metres away from her home. Come July 8th, a 41-year-old woman by the name of Rosa Toth was on the train at the Seaford railway station heading north. At approximately 5 p.m, she walked past the Seaford North Reserve and in the corner of her eye noticed a man loitering around the toilet block. Not long after noticing the man, he attacked her, but despite being dragged towards the unlit area of the park, she managed to break free from the man who was holding a gun to her head. There was a scuffle, and after realizing that the gun was fake, she was filled with adrenaline and covered in surface injuries, but managed to run and get the attention of a vehicle on the road, who stopped and drove her home, where she phoned police. On that night, 22-year-old Deborah Fream was abducted in her car in the early evening. Deborah had left her newborn baby with a male friend at her Seaford home when she left at around 7 p.m. to buy milk to make an omelette. She had not returned by 8 p.m, so her friend phoned Deborah's boyfriend. He then tried the police and the local hospital looking for her with no luck. He too decided to drive around to see if he could find her to no avail. He then reported her missing at Frankston police station. It's the 12th of July and a Carrum Downs farmer found the body of Deborah Fream. Her body was partially covered on Taylors Road, Carrum Downs. Deborah had been strangled with a cord, her body had been slashed, and she had her throat cut. July 30. Natalie Russell was just 17. She seemingly vanished while walking home from John Paul College in Frankston. The news of the many crimes against women had been publicised and the community was on edge. Natalie had taken a shortcut home to Frankston North via a fenced walkway which she took on most occasions. That same path is now named Nat's Track. Natalie was reported to be missing at around 8 p.m. that evening to Frankston Police Station. Police found her shortly after, noting that she had been dragged from the path through a hole made in a wire fence into the bushes. It was the fight that Natalie put up during her demise that ultimately helped investigators with the use of DNA evidence both at the scene and under the nails of Paul Denyer. July 31, Paul Denyer is arrested after police find a knife matching the description given by witnesses in the Russell case. On the 19th of November, Paul Denyer is found guilty of the murders of Stevens, Fream and Russell. December 17, Paul Denyer is sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences with a non-parole period of 30 years. In 1994, Denyer is transferred to a maximum security prison. In 1995, Denyer briefly identifies as a transgender woman named Paula. It's the year of 2000 and Denyer renounces his transgender identity and returns to using his birth name Paul. In 2023, Denyer remains in prison serving his life sentences. From the Looking Glass. What made Denyer kill? The question haunts us still. His motives remain shrouded in darkness. Some speculate about a deep-seated hatred of women. Others point to a troubled past, but ultimately the why remains elusive. A chilling reminder of the incomprehensibility of such violence. As these crimes fronted the court, the trial was a media frenzy. The details of Denyer's crimes were gruesome, leaving the community reeling. These Frankston murders left an ineradicable scar on the community. They forced a conversation about violence against women and the need for greater safety and vigilance. They also serve as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of innocent lives and the devastating permanent impact of the senseless acts of one standalone person. Former Detective Charlie Bezzina said that Denyer had been, and I quote, absolutely soaked the day after Natalie Russell was murdered, still having remnants of blood under his fingernails during his 2-hour grilling by police. Bezzina says, and just out of the blue, I think his words were, I did 3 of them. 3 of what, I said. Well, those 3 women you've been asking me about. I killed them. Detective Bezzina said that Natalie was his final murder. She was killed while she was walking home from school and happened to be Denyer's first planned murder. He was apprehensive to go into details about the crimes, but did say that the savagery of it was so significant he struggled to convey the words to Tara Brown in his interview on 60 Minutes. There is also a Stan documentary released in 2022 called No Mercy, No Remorse, presented by senior crime reporter from The Age Melbourne, John Sylvester, that goes into detail about Paul Denyer and his time incarcerated. The science of crime. Paul Denyer was apprehended due to the combination of police work and crucial pieces of evidence. So let me break it down for you in my favourite segment. So in the case of Natalie Russell, witnesses reported to seeing a man that matched his description near the scene. So this information was absolutely crucial in narrowing down the suspects. And during the investigation into Natalie's murder, police actually found a knife that matched the description given by witnesses. The knife became a key piece of evidence linking Denyer to the crime. His car was also identified by witnesses, which also strengthened the suspicion against him and helped build that case scientifically. When he was first brought in for questioning, he actually denied all involvement, but after the interrogation of a couple of hours, he actually confessed to all 3 murders. Like the detective said earlier, he blatantly said, all 3 women, I murdered them. But it's important to note that the police investigation was super thorough and persistent. They meticulously gathered the information, followed the leads, and did everything right, which helped this conviction immensely. There's often faults in the investigation process, but this was done quite quickly, which was a benefit to the case in the end. So I was able to examine some of the notes from the forensic pathologist who went over the Elizabeth Stevens postmortem. So this basically said, scientifically, it said that they had noted petechial hemorrhages. So that indicates strangulation. It's like little red dots basically around the neck. She also understandably had cuts and bruises to her face. And I have quoted what they concluded just for the specificity of the postmortem. It says the cause of death was aspiration of blood and hemorrhage from stab wounds to the neck in a woman whose neck has been compressed. So basically here we can identify the manner of death. As we said in the previous episodes, we've gone through the manner. It's the way in which it happened. So the manner in death, in all of these cases is murder. And the mechanism of death for Elizabeth Stevens would be the aspiration of blood combined with the hemorrhage from the stab wounds to the neck and the neck compression. So we don't know which one will have ultimately led to her demise first, but the combination of the three is what caused her to pass away. So when they did a crime scene investigation of the scene where her body was and the surrounding areas, the forensic team found her bag with books labelled with her name, and they also found the blade of a knife. The weather at the time of Fream's murder unfortunately tarnished the investigation a lot. It wasn't until a witness came forward naming and describing her car, which was a Nissan Pulsar, saying that it was driving erratically and the high beam lights were flashing on and off. So with that information, the police were able to take that basically as a piece of the puzzle and put it all together. The next day, in fact, police located her unlocked car on Madden Street. So forensics were able to find traces of her blood inside the car on that day. But then the attack on Russell was really the case that provided the breakthrough evidence that was needed to tie everything together and prosecute the offender. At around 2:30 p.m, a postie actually saw a rusty yellow Toyota and it had no number plates. It was parked near what's now known as Nat's Track on Sky Road, and the man was inside the vehicle at the time of the sighting. It is noted down that he did have binoculars on him at the time and he was using them. So later in the investigation, forensics examined that walkway and they found 3 holes that were cut in the wire fence, and they were all cut using the same tool. Now you'll remember that her body was dragged through one of those holes. So they tracked the car registration details down. Like I said, there was no rego on that car at the time, but they managed to find it. And the rego details led back to Paul Denyer, which was a great prosecuting fact and piece of evidence. At the time, he was residing at number 186 Frankston Dandenong Road, which was in Seaford, believe it or not, living with his then girlfriend. So the day after he murdered Natalie Russell was the 31st of July, and that was when he was taken into police custody for interviewing at 9:20 p.m, where he provided DNA to be tested. And as the detective said, he actually still had blood under his fingernails at that time, which was really scientifically essential for this case. The verdict. Paul Denyer was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. While this seems like a lot, it is a small measure of justice for the families of his victims. He did plead guilty to the murder of Miss Russell, Miss Stevens and Miss Fream, all in Melbourne's southeast. But come years later, Denyer had actually tried to put in an appeal for his case for parole to be seen with the Victoria's Adult Parole Board, and thankfully this was rejected with no bid for freedom allowed. Natalie Russell's family and Victorian MP David Limbrick, who was her boyfriend at the time, called to strengthen laws that would ensure people like Denyer be locked away indefinitely. So that's what's happened here. He is no longer eligible for parole and wasn't to begin with, but his appeal for parole failed. So Natalie's family have actually remained really strong advocates for her, including her brother, Darren Russell. There is a 60 Minutes episode where Darren speaks with Tara Brown and says that he has absolutely no belief whatsoever that Denyer has changed during his time in incarceration. He says, and I quote here, that Denyer is extremely callous and dangerous. And again, I quote from Darren Russell, I don't use this word lightly. He said, he is an evil person. We've got no reason to believe that he's changed. Darren also spoke about, on behalf of himself and his family, that they found solace that Natalie had ultimately led to the ending of Denyer's killing spree, seeing him captured and sentenced for the brutal crimes. It seems that this was the only light that the Russell family could hold on to during such grief, but it is super important. Natalie Russell's case did ultimately end this investigation and prosecute Paul Denyer and saved a lot of people's lives, because I have no doubt that he would have continued on in this killing spree. Case discussion. Right, I love this part because I get to talk a little bit and explain a little bit, and so let's get into it. So I actually grew up not far from this area at all, in an area called the Mornington Peninsula. In fact, one secondary school that I attended was the next suburb over from Frankston. It was in a suburb called Mount Eliza. Mum and I always used to go into Frankston frequently for a little bit of retail therapy. So this case has always struck a chord with most people I know down on the Mornington Peninsula, both just because of its location and also because of the intensity and brutality of the crimes. And it's just not heard of in that area. Unfortunately, violence against women is not an isolated incident at all, and I think we all can acknowledge that. While the Paul Denyer case was particularly horrific, it occurred within a broader context of violence against women in Australia. I've put together a couple of examples of violent crimes against women that occurred around the same time in Australia, just to highlight, like, this wasn't even the beginning. There were cases before this. This just really, really highlighted it, and the media got around these stories because these women were so young and these crimes were so brutal. So sadly, domestic violence was and remains significant as an issue in Australia as a whole. In the early 1990s, studies showed alarmingly high rates of domestic violence, often resulting in serious injury and death, like these cases. So while not always as stranger murders like this, the pervasive nature of domestic violence makes it a critical issue. And like I said, while this is not domestic violence per se, as this was a random attack, I suppose, on these three women, this is violence against women, which falls directly under that category. Sexual assault was also super prevalent. The data from the Australian Institute of Criminology shows us that there was a super high rate of sexual assault in the early 1990s, with many, many, many cases going unreported. And I think that's still a problem today, the underreporting. So the data that we're taking is super high, but the data that we could be taking, I have no doubt, would be much higher. While the Denyer case garnered significant attention due to its serial nature and the young age of the victims, and I guess because this was a stranger committing crimes, and most crimes are committed by people we know, other murders of women occurred during this period. These often involve cases of domestic violence, like we just spoke about, or violence related to other crimes. It's important to consider a couple of things here, though, like data limitations. So it's important to acknowledge that the data on violence against women in the early 90s may not fully reflect the true extent of the problem. That's because of, like we just said, underreporting. The underreporting was likely more common back then, and the societal understanding of these issues was less developed than it is today. I am so tongue-tied today, and I'm not even getting rid of it. You guys are just going to listen to it and laugh. These crimes occurred within a societal context where gender inequality and attitudes that condoned violence against women were more prevalent. It's a bit like, the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s era, where it's like women are to be seen and not heard type status. So a lot of women just wouldn't say anything. While awareness and responses to violence against women have improved on the slight, it remains a huge, huge, significant issue in Australia, and it is crucial to remember that each of these cases represents a unique tragedy with lasting impacts on families and communities. I know from that community, from Frankston, from the Mornington Peninsula, this is a crime, or these are crimes, I should say, that are never going to be forgotten. We have Nat's track named after Natalie. We've got the families there. We've got people who knew the families or know the families. And it's quite a humble community, and it's going to be a series of serial killings that it's just never going to leave the minds of the people in that area. So while Paul Denyer is a stark example of violence against women, it's essential to recognise that it was not an isolated incident. Violence against women takes so many forms, and addressing this issue requires consistent, ongoing effort to promote gender equality, challenge harmful attitudes, and provide support to victims, and encourage people to report and feel that they are comfortable and supported in reporting. I want to touch on family domestic violence briefly from a personal standpoint, as a few years ago I actually initiated a family domestic violence program, and I had onboarded two incredibly intelligent and motivated female students that I had met in my undergraduate degree to join me after I'd set everything up. So before recruiting them and setting everything up, I had actually made a number of surveys, had people answer the surveys. I'd put a lot of research into it, and then I decided, right, I'm going to my local council, I'm going to present this to them. And it was actually only a matter of weeks after major leg surgery, actually. So I was in a hip to ankle brace, on 2 crutches, put together all of this independently over a matter of months, nearly a year, actually, I had put into this. I collected data and made presentations and suggestions for both proactive strategies for family and domestic violence, remodeling family and domestic violence into the healthcare system, and also implementing education programs in both primary and secondary schools. So a lot of work went into this, you guys. I was very dedicated to it. I'm still dedicated to it and working on it slowly behind the scenes, but I had gone all in, okay? So I met with these people of the council. I was met with 2 men, okay? I'm talking about family domestic violence and specifically violence against women. I was met with 2 men, and now I'm not against men, and in fact, I do think men should be the ones to stand up and say, hey, I've got you. So I wasn't totally put off until I got the overall vibe of the meeting, okay? They kept my folder with my presentation, followed by telling me that there was no family domestic violence pandemic problem, and that essentially they have a family and domestic violence and violence against women workers in the police station for this type of thing. Guys, I'm dying. If you don't see the issue with this, let me just highlight it for you, because I know this is a lot of information and it can be very overwhelming, and sometimes it is hard to see what's in front of you. So I did try and be kind and patient at that time while I was kind of boiling on the inside. If you are in a family domestic violence situation, you're not going to the police station. You're just not going to if you're going to go anywhere for help, you're not going to drive into a bloody police station. Let's be real. That is so incredibly dangerous. You can be followed there. There's just so many things wrong with that. So placing the violence worker inside the police station was problematic to me. I actually ended up blatantly abandoning this project in the end. I was going through a lot at the time. Obviously, I just had surgery and there was a lot of other things going on, and I just couldn't run the program. But I was met with constant roadblocks. I had emailed so many members in council, at a state level, at a national level, at a local level, and I literally was met with responses of, there is no problem, or we're doing X, Y, Z, and blah, blah, blah. Nothing's been done. If you live in Australia right now, you know that there is absolutely a violence against women pandemic in this country right now. And it got worse during COVID, and it's still getting worse. Women are being killed constantly. So, like I said, I didn't have the energy to put my all into this, and it was really actually affecting my mental health quite a lot, because it was really sensitive work that we were doing, and I just felt like we were getting nowhere, and it was just so incredibly frustrating. Look at this case. We've just gone over these 3 women. And like I said, this is not domestic violence, but it is absolutely violence against women. Look at this case and look at the rapid decline since then. Rapid decline since then. Why? What do we need to do? Does Exhuming the Truth need to run educational workshops in schools about happy, healthy relationships and normal emotional responses, how to deal with a range of emotions, who your trusted people are, healthy conflict resolution even? These are things that I had ideas for in my initial FDV project that were knocked back. And actually, do you know what? I don't even know if they were knocked back. I don't know if those men kept my ideas and are planning on using them for themselves. At the time, I kind of didn't know what to do and be like, oh, actually, can I have my work back? I thought, oh, maybe they're going to use it. I quickly realized they had no interest in what I was doing. So I do want to push back into that sector slowly and do it the right way where it's not going to take such a toll, but it is an area that needs advocacy and improvement and a voice. So I really want to know your thoughts on that. I want you to tell me what you think needs to happen to see change in this area. I honestly think healthy conflict resolution is really important, and I think we need more men standing up, like to their mates, being like, hey, that I've noticed, you talk to your wife or your girlfriend or your sister or your mother this way. Like, do you think we could try another way? Men standing up to other men is a huge thing. But something we have in Perth, which I moved to Perth in COVID time. I can't remember what year that was. So I've only been here for maybe 4-ish years. In Melbourne, we didn't have this. But in Perth, we have something called 16 days in WA. So if you're from WA, you're probably like, yes, I know. But just for those who don't know, we have 16 days in WA towards the end of the year. I believe it is in October. I could be wrong. I have not written that down. I will get back to you on that. And it's basically a family and domestic violence and violence against women 16-day long campaign. And we spend those 16 days going over stories of women and families and victims and strategies and things like that to try and put it in the spotlight of the media, I suppose, and of the communities, and seek justice for these people and let people know that this is a problem. So 16 days in WA this year, I plan on doing a podcast every day for 16 days for the 16 days in WA on violence against women and family and domestic violence. I have a couple of special guests already lined up who are happy to speak. I've got a couple of businesses who are happy to speak. And I want to really go for it, you guys. And I would love your support on this because it is such a big problem. And I think it's fair to say all of us have a female in our life that we care about. And if we don't, then we might be a female and we might, have kids later on and want to have a daughter or have a son that is in a healthier relationship. It relates to everybody. So I think that is something massive, and I'd love to start the conversation on that, and I'd love you to join in. So please jump onto our discussion group and let's have that conversation. And while I'm going to end the case discussion there, before I go on for too long, I just want to remind everybody that today we remember Elizabeth Stevens, Deborah Fream, and Natalie Russell. We honour their memory and acknowledge the pain their families continue to endure. And lastly, I have a forensic fail this week for you guys. This is the case of Cameron Todd Willingham. The crime was in 1991. I tried to keep it around the same sort of era. A fire killed Willingham's 3 young daughters. The investigators concluded it was arson, relying on flawed interpretations of burn patterns and other fire scene indicators. Experts testified that the fire showed signs of accelerant use and other indicators of arson. This testimony heavily influenced the jury's decision. Later investigations by fire experts revealed that the original interpretations were incorrect. The fire patterns were consistent with a typical house fire and there was no reliable evidence of arson. Willingham was executed in 2004. Years later, he was pardoned based on the flawed forensic evidence. This case highlights several forensic fails. The misinterpretation of evidence. So the experts misinterpreted common fire patterns as signs of arson, a very, very big mistake and a very deadly mistake. The lack of scientific rigour, so the science used to convict Willingham was later debunked as unreliable. And the confirmation bias added again, the investigators may have been predisposed to believe it was arson, leading them to interpret evidence in a way that confirmed their biases. So looking for evidence and inferences that confirm what they're thinking rather than relying on the evidence alone. So the consequences of forensic fails, as we spoke about last time, and in this case, wrongful convictions. Innocent people are imprisoned or even executed, like this case is very extreme. The miscarriages of justice, the real perpetrators may be free to commit more crimes. Not so much in this case, it seemed to be a typical house fire. But the erosion of trust, the public trust in the justice system and the forensic science trust is absolutely completely damaged at this point, particularly because this gentleman was executed, which is incredibly sad. So it's important to note that forensic science is an incredibly valuable tool in criminal investigation. However, it's crucial that the forensic evidence is scientifically sound, properly interpreted, and clearly communicated. The Willingham case and others like it underscore the need for continuous improvement in forensic science, including better training, stricter standards, and independent oversight. So that's a very extreme case of forensic fails, but a very important one, and also around the same era. So we can see how things have definitely developed since then. So that leads us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for being here and for joining me on this episode. I hope you have enjoyed it here. If so, you can subscribe to stay up to date on new episodes, or you can find us both on Instagram and Facebook. Please feel free to jump onto our Facebook group and join in on the case discussions. You can find the link to our group in the podcast notes. As always, stay curious, stay informed, and until next time, trust your instincts and keep seeking the truth.